I've been looking at referees for about 3 years now, and there's two issues. There's three issues here. There's refereeing when it comes to foreign players, and I had a hunch that English referees have a distrust of foreign players. Now, this is not a racial thing. We didn't look in. We did a study on it, but we didn't look into race, because there are black English players like Sterling who are brilliant at winning penalties, and there are white English players like Vardy who are brilliant at winning penalties. But white or all the white, whatever race they were, the foreign players just didn't seem to be ranking very highly on winning penalties. And I was thinking, this is going to be a problem because our attacking players are, we've got 2 Africans and a Brazilian, and surely they should be winning more penalties. So we did a study on that. I got people to help from my site, and we went through all 600 Premier League penalties from 2012 to 2019, and we found that referees are less likely to give penalties to foreign players, not by as much as we thought, which is always why you need to look into the data, because you can think something and it might be intuitive, but the truth might be counterintuitive. And this was all based on minutes played. So, I think it was like almost 60% foreign minutes, and it was 40%. I grouped it into British Isles players, so to include Ireland as well, because it's the same sort of football culture, and I think that an English referee is not going to necessarily think of an Irishman as a foreigner in the way I think he might think of Sadio Mane as a foreigner. And I think, and it's this whole thing that we do see with Salah. When Salah gets pushed over in the box, so he's gone down, he's waited for the contact, he's gone down a bit easy. But if Vardy or Kane just feel a slight, it's like, oh, they've gone down, but they've got every right to go down there. They're clever, and so you get that bias from the commentators. So there's definitely a bias against foreign players in general, but it's not as big as I thought. Interestingly, when it comes to conceding penalties, referees hardly give penalties against English, specifically England players. So there were England players like Ashley Young, who in the entire time hadn't given away a single penalty, even though I'd seen him should have given away 2 in one match against Liverpool. And a week later, I think it was, hacked down Aguero in the box, got away with that. So there's actually a really big difference in that someone like Virgil van Dijk has given away a load of penalties, and he's absolutely rubbish. Phil Jones has given away 1 penalty in that 7 years. So there seems to be a bigger difference there. Now, being a Liverpool fan, I've also just wondered, where have our penalties been since 2013-14? Because that season was insane. And this is another really weird thing, is that when I looked at Liverpool's teams, if there were more British players in the team, Liverpool would tend to win more penalties. And when the number of foreign players went up, so this is over a 20-year period, when the number of foreign players went up, attacking players, the penalties went down. So, when we have players like Michael Owen, Gerrard, Murphy, we win a ton of penalties. Even in 2013-14, Suarez only won 3 penalties for fouls, and it was Sturridge, Sterling, Joe Allen won a Premier League penalty, John Flanagan won Liverpool Premier League penalty. If you finish in the top 4, you should be averaging around 7 penalties a season, and if you finish in the bottom 3, you average less than 3 penalties a season. That seems quite logical, because if you're a good attacking side, you would expect to get penalties, and if you're a bit of a rubbish team, you would expect to be under a lot of pressure in your own box a lot of the time and concede penalties. What's weird is that Liverpool over the last 6 years win penalties at a rate that's much closer to a relegated side than a successful side, even though in that time we've been a successful side. I looked at things like, for most touches in the opposition box last season, Salah was top, Sterling was second. I think it was then Mane and Firmino. 3 of the 4 players having the most touches in the box, and we just weren't getting the penalties things like that. And then I was looking at Anfield and the Kop, and the fact that my view was that there's this mythology around the Kop, that the Kop wins too many penalties. And I had that theory a few years ago, and then every time anyone like Steve Bruce or Neil Warnock or any Sam Allardyce, anytime there was a clear penalty that Liverpool should have had, they would have said afterwards, the Kop's always calling for penalties. That's a load of old nonsense. So Anfield is a thing, and it wasn't like there weren't penalty decisions. You know, there were 2 or 3 seasons ago, there were people stopping crosses with their arms, you know, punching. You know, Salah was being taken down in the box, Mane was being taken down in the box. Nothing was being given, especially at the Kop end. And so I found that, and all the other teams, most teams get 70% of their penalties at home. And Liverpool were the only club. I think we got something like, over a 5-year period, we got 40% of our penalties at Anfield. And so we were getting an average number of penalties, but we were getting a below average. So it's not like we were getting 20 away from home. Do you know what I mean? The missing penalties were at home. So there was something going on at Anfield in particular. And my view is that whenever there's a supposed bias about something, is that people then try too hard to bend over backwards to hide a bias or to show that they're not biased. So that's kind of been my issue. Then we got on to Martin Atkinson, who I'd forgotten. I think I cover him in the book, but he was the ref, I believe, when Keita was taken down in the box against Leicester in that 1-1 draw 2 seasons ago. When he just absolutely sort of sliced. Guy missed the ball, took him out. The same game that Harry Maguire should have been sent off for a last man foul, but only got a yellow. So with Atkinson, we sort of went into his figures, and he's given Liverpool 1 penalty in the last 24 games. Penalties per game, he would normally give a penalty every 4 games. Before Steven Gerrard released the book in 2015, saying how much he hated Martin Atkinson. Apparently, I've not read the book, but he just spent the book, laying into Martin Atkinson. I've read comments, a review of the book where it talks about how much Gerrard hates Martin Atkinson. And since then, that's when Klopp arrived. And since then, we've had him for 23 games, and he's given us 1 penalty. But in fairness to him, he does have another weird anomaly, and that's West Ham. He hasn't given West Ham a penalty for something like 27 games. So, but then in that time, West Ham have been pretty rubbish. So you could argue that it's not a bias, but then you have this situation where Steven Gerrard publicly lambasts Martin Atkinson, and since then, the way Martin Atkinson used to give us a penalty every 9 games has changed, where it's now been 1 in 23 games. The issue is that in those games, in that time, there have been lots of really clear penalty incidents. So it's not like he just happens to have had 23 games where nothing really happened. We can think of a lot of big instances, and this I focused in more on it after the Villa game, because at 1-0 down, although Liverpool ended up thinking the place out, 1-0 down, that was a clear, absolute foul on Mo Salah. If that had been given, 80% chance of a goal with a penalty, and then you've got a different game. So Atkinson is my feeling is that he doesn't like Liverpool, and he's just the benefit of the doubt. He's not going to give Liverpool's way. He doesn't like them. Now, if you look at Michael Oliver gives penalties slightly more frequently in general than Martin Atkinson. So he gives a penalty to one team or the other every 3.5 games. But I think he's given Liverpool 10 penalties, and he's given 5 penalties against Liverpool. And that seems like and over the period of time, that seems like a really normal distribution. Whereas with Atkinson, it just doesn't seem normal and natural.
He's always at the scene of the crime, Atkinson, isn't he? Even if we go back to the 1-1 draw at Old Trafford last season. Blatant foul on the halfway line to lead up to United's goal. And somehow, again, even with VAR, Martin Atkinson's there. And as you said, the Villa game, that could have gone either way, and Villa deserve full credit for the victory. But at 1-0 down, blatant penalty, even with VAR, nothing. And it can't be. I don't believe in coincidences, Paul. And as somebody who deals in statistics, I'm sure you don't really either.
You occasionally get some really weird coincidences, but generally, obviously, if there's a pattern, there's a pattern. Do you know what I mean? obviously last year as well, Atkinson was the one that on VAR at Villa Park as well, when we first got to the armpit rule, when he spent about 5 minutes on Firmino's armpit and finally decided, yeah, he's offside, and the lines were redrawn time and time again. So he's just somebody that I just don't think he likes Liverpool, and I don't know why there wasn't John Moss, who's also pretty incompetent, I think. I don't know.
I have a phrase for John Moss. Sorry, I say he's the referee that referees the middle third of the pitch better than anybody else, because it's the only area of the pitch he's ever in.
He's not the fittest. He's my age, and he's not the fittest of men. And yeah, he's kind of weird in that he gave more cop end penalties than anyone else over a certain period of time, over like 2 seasons, and those penalties were both to Spurs. And so I don't think there's an agenda with any other referees. I think they have the Anfield, the cop bias. I think they have that in their heads. But when you look at Michael Oliver, he gives Liverpool decisions, and he gives decisions against Liverpool. They generally, you obviously like it when your team gets the decision, but they generally seem to make sense. And he's the only referee that's given Liverpool, I think he's given Liverpool most of the Anfield penalties in the last few years. And that's not very many at all either, because, it's still not a lot. But so yeah, referees, they have their biases. I just think that there's a series of problems working against Liverpool, i.e. we've got foreign attacking players that are quick, but when they get fouled and go down, there's some distrust from the English referees. They can do some cognitive dissonance to make sure that when it's a different player, that's a foul. But when they do it, they're looking for it. So you've got that. I think you've got the fact that the cop traditionally used to win, lots of penalties. So that referees think. And then you've got some referees, and Martin Atkinson seems to do Liverpool games more than anyone else. Mike Dean is also a really good penalty giver. He's the most frequent penalty giver, but he doesn't really do our games unless we play Everton, I think. I worry that because I end up, the only time I take to Twitter these days is normally to moan about referees. And I don't ever want to think it's like a conspiracy or anything like that. It's not about conspiracies. It's about biases and just how how referees process information, and how people can think that some players are looking for the foul and that be a problem, and other players are looking for the foul and that's clever. And if it's Harry Kane or Raheem Sterling, it's clever, it's good play, it's what you need to do. So I think there are issues like that. So but no conspiracy. So I don't want to come off as a all refs hate Liverpool. I don't think that. I think that most Premier League refs are crap. I think 2 or 3 of them are decent, and I think Michael Oliver is excellent. On the Tomkins Times, when people found out that Michael Oliver was the referee at the weekend, people were saying that's better than the team news. You know what I mean? Because you just feel like he's not going to be biased for you, but he's not going to be he's not going to be Martin Atkinson. So